The chain was old. Lyria knew this because she had studied it, the way prisoners study everything within reach when there is nothing else to reach for. The links were iron, dark with age, bolted into the wall at a height that required her to either sit or kneel. Dravik had chosen that height deliberately. She understood that now in the way she understood most things Dravik did, precisely, clinically, and with the particular exhaustion of someone who has spent years converting cruelty into information. Because information was the only currency she was allowed to collect. She was sitting. She refused to kneel. The stolen scroll was spread across her knees, the bloodlines of the ancient Lunas, Volume 3, and she was on her 4th reading of it. Because the East Corridor Library had limited material on the subject, and she had already committed Volumes 1 and 2 to memory. She read by the light of the single tallow candle Dravik allowed her, which gave off approximately the same illumination as a determined firefly, but she had learned to work with what she had. Outside, the manor slept. Inside, her wolf, small, starved, deliberately kept dim, suddenly went rigid. Someone is coming. Not Dravik. She knew his footsteps the way a soldier knows incoming fire, the particular heavy drag of a man who wants to be heard, who constructs his presence as a warning. This was different. These footsteps were quiet, deliberate. The footsteps of someone who had made a choice to be where they were going and had no interest in announcing it until they arrived. The bolt moved. Slowly. As though whoever held it was giving her time. The door opened. And the scent that came through it rearranged everything in her head. She looked up. The man in the doorway was not what she expected. She had imagined Dravik's guards, interchangeable, dull, useful as furniture. She had not imagined this. Tall, dark-haired, eyes the pale gray of winter sky before the first serious snow, moving across the room with the swift efficiency of someone cataloging threats, and then landing on her on the chains, on the candle, on her face, and stopping. Something in his expression fractured. Not theatrically. Not with the performance of sympathy she had learned to distrust. Just quietly. A hairline crack across something that had been closed a very long time. Her wolf, despite everything, despite 17 years of deliberate starvation and containment, stood up and pressed her nose against the inside of Lyria's ribs. Him, her wolf said, with a certainty so absolute it had no room for argument. Lyria looked at the stranger in her doorway. She looked at the chains on her wrists. She looked at the scroll in her lap, the one about ancient bloodlines and fated bonds and women with power that no lock had ever been able to hold forever. She looked back up at him. "You're not Dravik," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended, hoarse from disuse, scraped clean of anything that might be mistaken for weakness. "No," said the Alpha King of the 7 territories, who had apparently found his way to her basement door and chosen, of all the things available to him, to knock the bolt softly instead of kicking it down. "I am not." He crossed the room. He knelt in front of her, a king, on his knees, in the dirt of her cell, and wrapped his hands around her chains. The iron snapped like it had been waiting for permission. If you want to find out what happens when the most powerful alpha in the 7 kingdoms declares war on the man who broke her, and what Lyria discovers about herself when the chains come off, make sure to like and subscribe to the library for more fated tales. Because this story is only just beginning. Chapter 1. The Locked Door and the Long Game. Let us go back. Because the thing about Lyria's story is that it did not begin in a locked room. It began with a lie, and like all good lies, this one was built on a foundation of something that looked enough like truth to fool everyone who didn't look closely. She was 6 years old when Dravik Ashvale came for her. She remembered fragments of before him, a woman's voice, low and warm, singing something that didn't have words, just sound, shaped like safety. Firelight. The smell of pine resin and something floral she could never later identify. A sense of being held that was entirely different from every form of being held she would experience afterward, because it was the kind that did not require anything in return. Then that was gone, and there was Dravik. He appeared at the shelter where the pack's unclaimed children were kept, the lunar orphanage, they called it, which sounded considerably more poetic than it looked in practice. with documents and a smile, and the particular brand of authority that comes from being a powerful man among wolves who have decided, collectively, that power is the same thing as virtue. "I will take this one," he said, looking at Lyria with the expression of a man selecting a useful tool from a selection of adequate tools. The shelter matron around, harried beta female named Wessa, who was doing her genuine best with inadequate resources, had beamed at him. "Lord Ashvale, how generous. She's a quiet girl. Well-behaved." Lyria had been quiet because she was terrified. She had been well-behaved because she had already learned, at 6 years old, that expressions of need were rarely rewarded in proportion to the need. She had looked at Dravik Ashvale and felt something cold move through her, a draft from the wrong direction, the way you feel it before you identify the broken window. She had said nothing. She was already learning. Ashvale Manor was impressive in the way that things built primarily to demonstrate wealth tend to be impressive, large, expensive, cold. The corridors were too long. The ceilings were too high. Every surface was decorated with the trophies of battles and the portraits of ancestors who had the collective expression of people who had never once been told a joke. Dravik gave her a room. The room was on the lower level, not the basement. Not yet. That came later, when she was 12 and her wolf first stirred, and he understood what a problem that represented, but already without a proper window, already with a bolt on the outside of the door, already with the particular atmosphere of a space designed for containment rather than habitation. "You will eat when meals are brought," he told her on the first night. "You will remain in your room when you are not performing your duties. You will not interact with guests without my explicit permission." He paused, as though running down a list. "You will not ask questions." Lyria, aged 6, looked at this man who had taken her from the only roof she'd known. "What are my duties?" she asked. A muscle ticked in his jaw. She had asked a question. Technically, she had not yet been told not to ask questions. The instruction had come after her question, which meant she was operating in a very brief window of technical innocence that she would never be allowed to occupy again. "You will serve at table when required," he said. "You will maintain the lower library. You will be available when I have need of you." A pause that contained multitudes. "You will be grateful." She was not grateful. She was very, very good at looking like she might be, which is a different and considerably more survivable skill. The years did what years do, they accumulated. Dravik's methodology revealed itself slowly, the way cold reveals itself in a house with no fire, not all at once, but in the progressive discovery of each new corner that the warmth had never reached. The meals were never enough. Not dramatically insufficient. He was too clever for dramatic, which would have raised questions from the pack servants who moved through the manor and might have carried observations to the wrong ears. Just slightly not enough. Just enough below adequate that her wolf stayed thin and her strength stayed managed and her ability to cause problems stayed theoretical. The lessons were also managed. She was taught to read because a woman who couldn't read the documents Dravik eventually planned to have her sign would be a logistical problem. She was taught basic pack protocols enough to function. She was not taught her rights. She was not taught pack law. She was not taught the words fated mate in any context that related to her own possible experience of one. She was taught, in 100 small systematic ways, that she was not the kind of person to whom significant things happened. Lyria filed all of this under information and got on with it. She did not accept it. Accepting and filing are different operations. Accepting is surrender. Filing is strategy. She was waiting, though she could not have told you at 8 or 10 or 13 exactly what she was waiting for. Something in her blood knew before the rest of her did. A low, patient certainty, like a tide that does not rush because it understands that the shore will still be there. She stole books. This became her primary act of rebellion, and it was carefully, brilliantly executed. She never took volumes from visible positions. She learned which shelves Dravik's eyes passed over and which ones he checked. She read in the hours when the manor's sleep was deepest, the stretch between 2 and 4 in the morning, when even the guards on the overnight rotation started nodding. She committed what she read to memory and returned every scroll within 24 hours, replacing them with a precision that would have impressed any professional archivist. She read history, natural history, Pack law she was not supposed to know. Star charts, which she cross-referenced with the view from her single barred window until she had mapped the sky by season. Poetry, which she had complicated feelings about but read anyway for the vocabulary. Medical texts. Agricultural texts. 3 separate volumes on the economic structure of the 7 territories. And the ancient Luna scrolls. These she came back to repeatedly, with a compulsion she didn't fully examine, drawn by something that felt less like intellectual interest and more like recognition. The ancient Lunas, the first female wolves blessed by the moon goddess, carrying power that amplified the pack bonds around them, that could call truth from liars, that burned silver and warm and old. Their bloodline, the texts insisted, had died in the last Great War. Every time she read that sentence, something in her chest said, wrong. She did not know why. She filed it. She was 17 when she first heard the name Kaelin Draxmore in a context that made her pay full attention. She had heard it before. You could not exist in the pack world, even at Lyria's deliberately limited information diet, without hearing about the Alpha King. He was simply a fact of the landscape, like weather or geography. He had unified the 7 territories through a combination of military force, political architecture, and, she read in one particularly entertaining scroll, a personal aura of authority that had reportedly caused 3 opposing Alpha Lords to simply sit down and stop arguing on 2 separate recorded occasions. The scroll's author appeared personally delighted by this. What made her pay full attention at 17 was not Kaelin's name, but Dravik's behavior when a messenger arrived from the royal capital. She saw it from the upper corridor, watching through the balustrade in the practiced invisible way she'd perfected over 11 years. The messenger was royal, the seal on the saddlebag unmistakable, the horse too good for anything less than official business. Dravik met him in the courtyard, read the document twice, and then did something she had only seen him do once before, during a confrontation with a rival pack lord who had threatened to take one of his trade routes. His hands went still. Not with composure. With the specific, deliberate stillness of someone who is suppressing a reaction and is very aware that they are being observed and is working very hard to ensure that no one can see what the reaction actually was. He thanked the messenger pleasantly, invited him in for refreshment, sent him on his way within the hour with a return letter whose seal he double-checked 3 times. That evening, through the wall of the study she was not supposed to be within 20 feet of, Lyria heard him speak to his senior steward in a voice she had not heard before. Controlled. Urgent. Calculating. Move up the timeline, he said. The king is asking questions. She went back to her room and lay in the dark and looked at the stars through her barred window and thought about fated mates and bloodlines and a king who asked questions that made pack lords move up their timelines. She also thought, whatever is coming, come faster. 12 months later, almost to the week, it did. Chapter 2. The King and the Scent of Moonlight. The thing about Kaelin Draxmore that the scrolls never quite captured, and Lyria had read enough of them to have developed opinions, was his patience. The dramatic scrolls gave you the battles, the unifications, the confrontations in which opposing forces folded before his authority, like inadequately structured origami. They gave you the legend. What they did not give you was the 20 years of quiet work before the legend, the intelligence gathering, the assessment, the long careful study of the board before the first piece moved. He had been watching Dravik Ashvale for 3 years. Not personally, he had people for that, a network of information gatherers distributed through the 7 territories like nerves in a body, reporting back with the regularity and accuracy that his rule depended on. What they reported from the Eastern Territories had been building for those 3 years into a picture that Kaelin recognized with the instincts of a man who had spent his adult life learning what ambition looked like when it was trying to disguise itself as loyalty. Minor lords receiving visits from Ashvale representatives, shortly followed by a subtle but measurable shift in their trade and tribute patterns. Ancient artifacts moving through private markets in the eastern ports, specifically artifacts associated with the old Luna bloodlines, the kind that had no value to anyone without a very specific purpose in mind. Rumors, carefully unattributable, beginning to circulate in pack council chambers about the legitimacy of centralized rule, Surely the territories were better served by regional authority. Surely the old ways had merit. Surely a king so distant from the eastern borders could not truly understand their needs. It was, Kalen thought, the most expensive and time-consuming preparation for a coup he'd ever watched being assembled. He grudgingly respected the craftsmanship while finding the entire enterprise personally tedious. He brought 6 warriors. This was, as social communications went among pack lords, the equivalent of showing up to someone's formal dinner in working clothes, technically acceptable, definitively insulting, entirely deliberate. It said, "I consider you a minor problem. I am barely inconveniencing myself to address it." He was aware that Dravik would understand the message. He was counting on it. A rattled host made mistakes. The road to Ashvale Manor took 2 days through the eastern pine territories, which were objectively beautiful in the way that wild things are beautiful, vast and indifferent, and aggressively unconcerned with the political dramas of the creatures moving through them. Kalen rode in the kind of silence that his warriors had learned to recognize as thinking silence rather than dangerous silence, which was a distinction they had spent considerable effort learning to identify accurately. His second, Commander Voss, a broad, silver-haired beta of approximately 50 who had served 3 Alpha Kings and had the collected perspective of someone who had watched a great deal of history being made by people who would not have been his first choice, rode alongside him for a while before speaking. "Ashvale will have prepared a welcome," Voss said. "Yes. Generous. Demonstrative. Designed to make us feel both comfortable and obligated." "Yes. You'll eat the food but not trust it." "I'll eat the food. I'll have Reth check it first." Reth, riding third in the column, looked up with the expression of a man who had not been part of this conversation and was now discovering he very much was. Why me specifically?" "You're young," Kalen said. "You'll recover faster." That is not comforting, my king." It wasn't meant to be comforting. It was meant to be logistically accurate. Voss, who had long ago made peace with his king's specific brand of pragmatism, did not react. Reth spent the next hour reconsidering his career choices, which Kalen found mildly amusing and entirely justified. Ashvale Manor presented itself magnificently. This was, Kalen noted, the first mistake, a manor that knew it was being evaluated and had dressed accordingly. Genuine confidence did not redecorate before company arrived. Everything was too polished. The guards at the gate were too perfectly positioned. The stable hands moved with the specific over-rehearsed efficiency of people who had been told that the king was watching and to act natural, which is instruction that makes acting natural functionally impossible. Dravik himself stood at the entrance. He was a large man, alpha-built, broad through the shoulders, carrying his authority in his physical presence the way lesser wolves often did. He had a face that looked like it had practiced trustworthiness in mirrors. His smile arrived exactly on schedule, warm and wide and approximately as genuine as the decorative family crests Kalen had noticed on the gate, impressive, expensive, belonging to a bloodline that was not quite what it claimed to be. "Alpha King Kalen," he said, with the specific warmth of a man welcoming someone he deeply wishes would leave. "This is an honor beyond expression." "Lord Ashvale," Kalen said, dismounting with the economy of movement that his warriors matched exactly. "Your hospitality precedes you." It preceded him the way a debt preceded a debtor, but Kalen kept that observation internal and smiled pleasantly. The dinner was excessive. Every element of it was calibrated, the quality of the wine, very good, which said I have resources, the variety of the courses, numerous, which said I am generous, the guest seating arrangement, Kalen at Dravik's right, which said I acknowledge your authority while seated in the position of honored guest rather than supplicant. Dravik told stories with the practiced ease of a man who had told them many times before to different audiences, adjusting the details for maximum resonance with whichever king or lord was currently across from him. He was, Kalen noted, very good. He was also, Kalen noted, sweating very slightly despite the fact that the great hall was not warm. Kalen drank his wine. Reth had confirmed it unpoisoned with the aggrieved expression of a man who felt this was not strictly in his job description. and listened and watched and performed the role of an alpha king who was enjoying himself and had no particular concerns, which was a role he had been playing in various forms for 20 years and had refined to a high art. And then, somewhere between the third course and the fourth, his wolf moved. Not aggressively. Not in threat response. It was quieter than that, the internal equivalent of someone lifting their head at a sound too faint for ordinary hearing, tilting toward it, confused, and then increasingly not. There. The scent was extraordinary. It moved beneath the heavy surface of the dinner, the meat, the spiced wine, the fire, the collective wolf scent of Dravik's household, like a thread of something entirely other. Old. Deeply, unnervingly old. Moonlight was the closest he could come to describing it, moonlight and forest rain and a third note that had no name in any of the 7 territorial languages he spoke, but that his blood knew the way blood knows its own temperature. His wolf, which had been sitting calm and professional and entirely clinical for the better part of a decade, his wolf, which had politely declined to have opinions about any female wolf he had encountered in 9 years of searching, sat up. Stood up. There, it said. Down. Below. She's there. Kalen set down his wine glass. He completed the dinner. He listened to 2 more of Dravik's stories, laughed appropriately, and retired to his assigned chambers with the measured unhurriedness of a man planning to sleep. He waited until the sounds of the manor settled into the particular texture of genuine middle-of-the-night quiet, different from performed quiet, different from watchful quiet, the real silence of a house that has finally forgotten to hold its breath. Then he followed the scent. Down 3 corridors, past a sleeping guard whose dedication to his post could be generously described as aspirational, down a staircase that the tour of the manor had conspicuously omitted, to a door. Iron bolt. Heavy lock. Old wood. The kind of door that was built with an explicit architectural philosophy. What is behind this should stay behind this. He lifted the bolt. He opened the door. And met silver eyes that were not afraid but furious above a scroll about ancient Luna bloodlines on the face of a girl who looked at him the way a fire looks at the wind, as something that might extinguish it, or might be what it needed to finally spread. His wolf went silent. Mine, it said, into that silence, with the absolute authority of something that had been waiting a very long time and had finally, irrevocably arrived. Kalen looked at her chains. The anger that moved through him then was not the hot, loud kind. It was the cold kind. The deep kind. The kind that does not announce itself because it is already too far along for announcements. He crossed the room, knelt, and snapped the iron. "Can you stand?" he asked. She looked at him with those extraordinary silver eyes, old power in a young, too thin face, fury and assessment, and a guarded, careful intelligence that had clearly been doing its work in circumstances that did not deserve it. "I've been standing my whole life," she said. "I just haven't been allowed to move." And Kalen, Alpha King, thought, Dravik Ashvale has no idea what he has been keeping. Chapter 3. What Freedom Costs and What It Builds. Freedom, Lyria discovered, was louder than she expected. Not literally outside Ashvale Manor, in the open night air. The world was vast and quiet in the way that places without walls tend to be. But inside her, in the architecture of herself that had been built around confinement the way a plant grows around a cage. The sudden absence of the cage was disorienting in ways she had not anticipated and was not quite ready to examine in the middle of a tactical escape from a pack lord's property. She led Kalen's party out of the manor in 11 minutes, 40 seconds. She knew the guard rotation the way she knew the names of stars, precisely, completely, with the proprietary intimacy of someone who had had nothing else to do with her excellent memory for years. She took them through the kitchen corridor, past the sleeping form of the overnight guard, whose snoring would have covered a moderately sized cavalry charge, through the secondary gate that the day guards locked but the night rotation forgot about with impressive consistency, and into the tree line that ran along the northern edge of the grounds. Kalen's 6 warriors materialized from the shadows like they had been there all along, which they had, because Kalen had, with the quiet foresight that appeared to characterize most of his decisions, positioned them before dinner. They looked at her. She looked at them. The youngest one, open-faced, with the expressive helplessness of someone who had not yet learned to keep his reactions internal, looked at her wrists, at the marks where the chains had been, at her general condition, which was not optimal by any standard of measurement. His expression did something very human and completely uncalculated. She looked away from it because kindness from strangers was something she had approximately zero framework for processing, and this was not the time to develop one. Northeast, Kaylin said. 3 territories. They rode. The camp they made was temporary by design, Kaylin explained. In the first of what she was learning was his characteristic direct, unhurried style, that the goal was distance before Dravik's morning guard discovered the bolt, followed by repositioning to a defensible location while the formal proceedings were initiated. He said formal proceedings the way judges say order in the court, with the certainty of a man for whom formal proceedings are not a question of whether but of when and on whose terms. She was given a tent. She stood in the center of it for a long time. A tent was not, objectively, impressive accommodation. It was canvas and a sleeping mat and a lit brazier and the absence of a bolt on the outside of the flap. But the absence of the bolt occupied the entire space like a physical presence. She kept looking at where it wasn't. She kept expecting it. "You don't have to stay in it," said a voice outside. She turned. Reth was standing at the entrance, doing the earnest face thing that appeared to be his default setting. "The tent. You can, there's no reason to stay inside it. If you wanted to walk around. Or sit by the fire. It's not," he stopped, apparently having navigated himself into a conversational corner. "I'm making this worse," he said. "A little," she agreed. "But the effort is noted." He nodded, relieved. Then, also, Oswin, that's the cook, wanted me to tell you that if there's anything specific you need or want, food-wise. Because he found out about the portions situation. And he is, I want to be precise here, furious. He took it personally. He's been stress cooking since approximately an hour ago, and there is a significant quantity of elk available. Lyria stared at him. "I've never had roasted elk," she said. Reth looked like she had just told him the sky was a surprising new color. "Right," he said, with careful, controlled emotional neutrality. "I'll tell him." She ate. Not Dravik's careful portions, not the measured, calculated just enough to keep a key functional, but actual food, in actual quantity, prepared by a man whose emotional investment in the project was evident in the result. Oswin did not speak directly to her the first evening. He simply delivered the food, looked at her hands, and went back to his fire with the expression of a person who has decided to express their feelings through action rather than language and has an extensive action vocabulary. She ate until she was full for the first time in years. Her wolf, starved and small and long compressed, pressed warm against her ribs in a way that felt like something uncurling. Kaylin came to her tent later, carrying 2 bowls and approximately the same calm certainty he carried everywhere, which she was beginning to suspect was simply his permanent condition. He told her about her bloodline. He told her about her mother. He told her what Dravik had known and why he had done what he had done with the cold. Even delivery of a man who is giving you information he knows will hurt and is doing it with the care it deserves rather than dressing it up in softening language that would only insult her intelligence. She listened. She filed. She did not cry, though the 6-year-old who still lived somewhere inside her architecture, behind all the careful walls, pressed her hands flat against them and made them shake slightly. "You knew what I was before you opened the door," she said, when he finished. "I suspected. My wolf confirmed it. And you, the mate bond. You recognized it." "Yes." She looked at him in the brazier light, at the winter sky eyes and the controlled expression and the careful distance he maintained, consistent and deliberate, not crowding her, not pressing her, simply being present and letting her decide what to do with that presence. "I have spent 17 years," she said carefully, "being something someone else needed me to be. I have no intention of exchanging one cage for another, regardless of how different the lock looks." "I know," he said. "I'm not finished. I know that too. Whatever I am to you, whatever the bond is, I need you to understand that I am learning to be a person before I am anything else. That comes first. That has to come first." Kaylin looked at her for a long moment. Then, with the same simplicity he brought to everything, then that's where we start. She looked at him. She thought about all the scrolls she had read, the ones about power and bloodlines and bonds and battles, and the long, complicated history of women whose names were written in the margins of other people's stories. "Your wolf," she said. "What does it tell you right now?" A pause. "That you are the most remarkable thing it has ever encountered," he said, "without decoration, without performance. And that it can wait." Her own wolf, starved and cautious and long-caged, pressed warm against her ribs again. She did not tell him that. She was going to need considerably more elk before she was ready to say anything like that out loud. The days after were a kind of reconstruction. She had not known how much she had been holding until she began, incrementally, to set it down. The constant vigilance, the assessment, the mapping of threats, the management of expression that had been so automatic for so long it had become structural, did not disappear. It simply began, for the first time, to coexist with something else. She trained with Reth, who proved to be a genuinely good instructor of the practice sword, enthusiastic, technically competent, and constitutionally incapable of maintaining the intimidating trainer persona for longer than about 6 minutes before his face started doing things. She got faster every day. Her wolf, fed and given space, began to find her feet. She read Kalen's field maps without permission, and when he found her doing it, he did not confiscate them. He sat across from her and explained what she was looking at. She asked questions that revealed the 17 years of pack law she had memorized illegally through a basement library, and watched his expression make a small, careful adjustment as he recalibrated his understanding of exactly how much she knew. "Dravik kept you from reading pack law," he said. "He tried," she said. That almost smile again. "He was somewhat less successful than he believed. Most of his plans had that quality," she said, "when I examined them carefully." She discovered, in those days, something she had not expected, that her power, the ancient Luna bloodline, uncoiling slowly in the warmth of adequate food and open air, did not feel foreign. It felt like coming home to a room she had only read about, fitting into dimensions she had always, somewhere, known she had. The silver rose in her eyes at will, then at intention. The old scroll's description of truth sight, the ability to see the real shape of a lie in the face of the wolf telling it, came first, like a muscle remembering itself. Warmth came next, the amplification quality, the way her presence seemed to settle the camp's wolves into a slightly deeper peace without her actively doing anything. And beneath it all, like the deepest root of the oldest tree, something she had not yet touched. Something that recognized the moonlight and answered it. She was not ready for that yet. But she was getting there. And then the horns sounded from the northeast. And Reth said 80 wolves, Ashvale colors. And Lyria looked at the practiced sword in her hand, and then at the direction of the sound and thought, 17 years. Her wolf stood up in a way she had never felt before. Not the cringing, compressed stance of an animal that has forgotten it has teeth. Something older. Something that had been waiting with the patience of tides for the moment the shore finally appeared. "Now," her wolf said. And Lyria walked out of the camp and into the open air and toward everything that had been done to her for 17 years, with silver rising in her eyes and the ancient Luna power coming up through her bloodline like the moon rising over a very long night. Chapter 4. The Field, the Fracture, and the Freedom. 80 wolves was, objectively, a lot. Lyria was aware of this from a purely numerical standpoint. She had read enough military history in Dravik's East Corridor library to understand the mathematics of force, that 80 trained pack warriors against 6 royal guard, 1 king, 1 cook with complicated feelings, 1 earnest young soldier named Reth, and 1 recently unchained ancient Luna heir with 3 days of sword practice was not, on paper, a favorable equation. Paper, however, had never accounted for the specific variable of righteous fury. Dravik rode at the head of his force like a man who had rehearsed this moment, and she understood now, he'd spent years on it, building alliances and collecting ancient relics and keeping her weak and waiting for exactly the right arrangement of pieces. The Luna binder at his belt was the piece she recognized from the scrolls, a black iron disc, old as the wars that created it, designed to cap an ancient Luna's power permanently. The text described it with the matter-of-fact grimness of weapons documentation. Effective. Irreversible. Requires proximity. He had known she would be here. He had come prepared. She noted this with the same flat, filing calm she had applied to 17 years of his cruelty, and decided that prepared was not the same as right. The field between the camp and the tree line was not large, 50 yards of open frost-hardened ground, the kind of terrain that battlefields become by accident rather than design, defined by the space available rather than the space preferred. Kalen's 6 warriors had arranged themselves with the quiet precision of professionals, and Kalen himself stood in the open. In the specific way of a king who does not require the theatrical staging that lesser men use to compensate for the absence of genuine authority. He simply was, and the field organized itself around him accordingly. Lyria stood at his left. She had positioned herself there without particular thought. It simply felt correct, the way directions felt correct once you learned to read maps. He had not suggested it. He had not guided her. He had walked out, and she had walked beside him, and that was apparently where she was. Her wolf noted this with quiet satisfaction, and received a firm "not now" in response. Dravik's horse stopped at the tree line. He looked at the arrangement, the 6 warriors, the king, and Lyria standing in the open air with her eyes beginning to run silver, free and unchained, and very clearly not the version of herself he had managed for 17 years. And performed the calculation visible on his face as a very brief, very controlled recalibration. Then his smile came back, which was, in retrospect, an error. The smile was his shield, and the problem with shields is that they tell you what the person inside them is afraid of. Draxmore, he said. The carrying voice, the theatrical authority. I believe you have something of mine. Kalen did not raise his voice. He never needed to. You have no property that concerns me, Ashvale, he said. Your holdings will be addressed at tribunal. Your treason charges alongside them. Dravik's smile widened, the structural one, the one she'd watched survive many things. He looked past Kalen to her, and the look he gave her was the one she knew best, the one that said you are a thing, the one that had been the wallpaper of her childhood. The one she had refused to agree with for 17 years in the privacy of her own assessment, even when she was too weak to argue it externally. Lyria, he said, warm as he ever was before pack witnesses. Come now. Whatever this man has told you. Stop. One word. Her voice. But it came out carrying something she had never heard in it before, a resonance beneath the sound, a depth that moved through the air the way bass notes move through stone, feeling rather than just hearing. The silver was fully present in her eyes, rolling in with the tide that had been coming in for days. The 80 wolves behind Dravik moved. Not forward, back. Fractionally. Involuntarily. The way a candle flame moves from breath you didn't mean to exhale. She felt their pack bonds the way the scrolls had said she would, visible, almost, like silver threads stretching back through the air between each wolf and their connections. She felt which threads were strong and which were thin. She felt which were built on genuine loyalty and which were built on calculation, and which, the most important ones, were built on lies they had accepted without examining because it was easier than the alternative. The gray-haired beta lord from the northern marches had a great many threads that looked, on close examination, deeply uncomfortable. Tell them, she said to Dravik, and the power in her voice made the words land in every wolf present like something pressed against a bruise. Not pain, just presence. The unbearable pressure of a truth demanding to be acknowledged. Tell them why you took me. Tell them what you found in the scrolls. Tell them what you planned to do when your alliances were in place. The truth sight showed her his face before his face showed the others, the calculation, the cold machinery, the absence of anything resembling the humanity he had performed so convincingly for everyone who hadn't lived behind his locked doors. It moved across his features like light moving across water, just for a second, just at the surface. Just long enough. The gray-haired beta lord made a sound. Then, Lord Ashvale. Very carefully. I believe there has been a significant misrepresentation of the nature of this enterprise. This was diplomatic language for, I have made an error of catastrophic professional proportions, and I am beginning the process of corrective action immediately. Other voices followed: the Western Flank Lord, the Northern Border Representative, two minor lords from the Far East who had apparently been maintaining skepticism from the beginning and were now discovering their skepticism had been fully vindicated and were experiencing the complicated emotion of being right about something they had wished they were wrong about. Dravik's army was, in real time, doing the military equivalent of remembering urgent appointments elsewhere. His face did the thing it had never done in 17 years of being watched. It lost its structure. The smile, that architectural marvel, finally encountered a load-bearing failure and came apart. "You," he said to her, and it was the voice under the voice, the one he'd used in the locked room when the performance was unnecessary. "You ungrateful, useless." Stop. This time, it wasn't just her voice. It was everything: the bloodline, the power, the 17 years of silence that had been accumulating pressure behind a wall he had spent enormous effort building, and the wall had come down, and what was behind it was not the small, broken, weaponizable thing he had planned for. Silver light. Not symbolic, literal. It rose from the ground around her in a sweep that the older wolves would later describe as watching the moonrise compressed into a single second, warm and old and completely uninterested in being contained. Dravik reached for the Luna binder at his belt. He threw it. It crossed the 50 yards between them in the time it took her to breathe in. And she raised her hand. And her power caught it. Caught it the way a storm catches something thrown into it, completely, immediately, without negotiation. The silver light wrapped the binder, and the binder, meeting power it was designed to suppress, but had never encountered at full strength, did the only thing left available to it. It shattered. The pieces hit the frost-hardened ground in a small circle at her feet. The field went absolutely, entirely, profoundly silent. Then Reth said, from somewhere behind her, "I want it noted that none of this was in any briefing." Dravik's arrest was formal and quiet. He went without the performance, which was the most honest thing he had ever done in her presence, the final evidence, if any more was needed, that the performance had always been for audiences he was managing, never for truth he was telling. Stripped of his allies and his weapons and his 17-year architecture of manipulation, he was simply a man who had made a calculation and been wrong about the most important variable. Her. She watched them take him. She felt not satisfaction exactly. The wound of 17 years does not close the moment its source is removed. It was something quieter. The particular quality of silence that follows a sound that has been constant for so long you had stopped hearing it as sound and begun experiencing it as weather, and now, suddenly, it was gone. And the world was not the same shape it had been before. But it was a shape she could work with. Kaelin came to stand beside her. The field was clearing, allies departing with varying speeds corresponding to the depth of their legal concerns, warriors beginning the work of camp reassembly, Oswin already, inexplicably, having rekindled his cooking fire. "Are you injured?" Kaelin asked. "No. The power, that was the first time at that scale." "Yes. How does it feel?" She thought about it. She looked at her hands, which were steady now. At the fragments of the binder at her feet. At the open sky above the field, wide and blue and without bars. "Like I've been speaking very quietly for 17 years, she said, and I finally used my real voice. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "It's a remarkable voice." "I know," she said. Then, because she was learning to let things be what they were instead of filing them away for later. "Thank you." For the door. He looked at her. "You would have found your own way out eventually," he said. She considered this. Probably. But later. And without the elk. Something broke in his expression fully, this time. Not the hairline crack of the first night. The whole thing, opening up into something warm and genuine and entirely unmanaged. He laughed. She had not heard him laugh before. It landed in her chest like warm light in a cold room, settling in the spaces where 17 years of controlled distance had lived. Her wolf abandoned all pretense of composure. "Now?" it said. "Not yet," she said, out loud, to no one visible. Kaelin raised an eyebrow. "My wolf," she said. "She has opinions." "Mine has had opinions since the moment I opened that door," he said. "I have been managing them." She looked at him. At everything he was: the patience, the certainty, the care that expressed itself in the specific respect of letting her be the author of her own choices. At the man who had not swept her up dramatically, but had walked beside her, slightly ahead on stairs, slightly to the left in the open air, consistently and without announcement placing himself between her and anything that might be a threat. She took one step toward him. Just one. He remained still, waiting, as he had been waiting, as his wolf had been waiting, with the deep patience of something that understood its own certainty and had no need to press it. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm, steady, entirely deliberate. And her wolf, malnourished no longer, caged no longer, kept small no longer, lifted her head to the open sky above the cleared field and sent her voice into it, long and luminous and free. From the tree line, a wolf howled back. Then another. Then low and resonant and unmistakable, Kalen's wolf, joining the sound she made, the way deep notes find their harmony not by overpowering, but by completing. She stood in the open air with the hand of the Alpha King warm in hers, and the ancient Luna power settled around her like something coming home, and the sky above her was very wide and very blue and did not have a single bar. "This," said her wolf, with 17 years of compressed certainty finally released, "is what we were waiting for." The trial of Lord Dravik Ashvale lasted 4 days. It was attended by representatives from all 7 territories, which was considered either unprecedented or deeply predictable depending on who you asked. The charges were numerous and were read in full on the first day, which consumed approximately 3 hours and produced in the gallery an atmosphere that can only be described as extensively vindicating for anyone who had found Dravik suspicious and considerably more uncomfortable for anyone who had not. 17 Pack Lords submitted cooperative declarations. The gray-haired beta lord from the northern marches submitted a document of such legal thoroughness and personal accountability that Kalen read it twice, found it genuinely impressive, used it as a doorstop for 6 weeks, and then formally acknowledged the lord's cooperation at the Territorial Council, which, all things considered, was more than he deserved and exactly the kind of measured pragmatism that had kept 7 territories unified for 2 decades. Oswin, the camp cook, took Lyria's culinary education as the defining project of his professional life. By spring, she had eaten roasted elk, spiced river trout, honey bread with preserved berries, 3 varieties of stew she ranked privately and contested publicly on principle, a particularly confrontational root vegetable dish that Reth described, unasked and without prompting, as an experience and a celebratory meal involving approximately everything that Oswin knew how to make, prepared on the occasion of her official recognition as the last heir of the ancient Luna bloodline at the Territorial Council in the capital. She stood before the full council in a hall that had probably not seen genuine ancient Luna power in over a century, with her silver eyes fully present and her bloodline unhidden for the first time in her life, and spoke for 52 minutes on the subject of the rights of Omega wolves under pack law, specifically regarding the legal framework around guardianship, informed consent in pack bonds, and the extremely overdue revision of several tributary statutes that had not been updated in 3 generations and were, to use a technical legal term, deeply inadequate. Several senior council members developed the specific expression of people encountering a problem they had not previously categorized as a problem and were now unable to categorize as anything else. Kalen, in the king's seat, watched her speak. He had the expression of a man witnessing something he had suspected was extraordinary and is now watching confirmed, with the particular warmth of someone whose wolf is saying "I told you" in a very self-satisfied tone. She did not look at him during the address. She had things to say, and she was saying them, and she was doing it in her own voice at her own volume, and that was the most important thing. She looked at him after. Briefly. Just once. Just long enough. He held her gaze. Something passed between them in that look, not the thunderclap of the old romantic scrolls, not the theatrical overwhelm of mated bonds described in the dramatic texts she had read by candlelight in a locked room. Something quieter than that. Something built over weeks of walking beside each other, of swords in practice yards and maps in firelight, and food that was finally enough, and a wolf who had learned, slowly, to believe the bolt was gone. Slowly, she told her wolf that night, when they were alone in the royal chambers she had been given. Still, her wolf said. Yes, she agreed. Still. But mine. She went to the window, which did not have bars, and looked at the stars. She knew their names, all of them. Every one she had learned through a single barred window in a cold room on the nights when the world was very small and the ceiling of pain had not yet been reached, and the only thing she had was the knowledge that the universe was larger than her room even if she couldn't yet reach it. She could reach it now. She stepped onto the balcony. She tipped her head back. She shifted. And Lyria, former Omega, former prisoner, stolen scroll reader, ancient Luna heir, woman who had filed 17 years of survival under information and was now finally, magnificently, spending it, ran. Open ground beneath her paws. Open sky above her. The whole wide dark world, free of locks and bolts and careful portions, free of the back of a hand and the click of iron and the voice that said you are nothing in the tone of a man who needed that to be true. She ran until the wind was loud in her ears, and the frost was cold on her paws, and the stars were overhead exactly where she'd always known they were. And somewhere behind her, matching her pace without crowding it, running alongside without running ahead, the sound of another wolf, steady and warm and winter sky gray, keeping the pace she set. Not leading. Beside. As it had always been. From the first moment in a doorway when a king had knelt in the dirt of her cell and asked if she could stand. She had stood. She was running now. And the night was very long and very wide and entirely, irrevocably, hers. And